Story 1. Admissions. Old portraits of dignitaries and ancient politicians had been hung in a boastful collection on the encircling walls of Burgundy, dark enough to impart arrogance to the unsure and confidence to those of lichen, wills, the marble pillars and brass railings emitting an astounding gleam from all sides, and Stuart felt assured to be in the proper place. It had only taken him a few minutes to find it. Two others were waiting, another man and a woman, sitting on oaken chairs with cushioned seats. The woman's blonde hair reminded him of wheat, her face evoking the sun rising over the fields. She didn't say anything to him, but seemed to be gauging his ability, his deftness, grinning slightly with her piercing grey eyes. The man, however, arose from the chair and held out his hand, a large fellow with a full beard of apparent Latin American heritage, perhaps Iberian. "Welcome, Mr. Unitas," he said vestedly. "We'll be with you in just a moment. Sarah here has had her appointment postponed for over an hour." "Oh," Stuart replied. The man nodded, adjusting his charcoal gray knit sweater vest, and gazed regretfully upon the woman, evidently another recruit seeking entry into the prestigious club. "I'm afraid you'll have to stand until it's time for her to go in." At the same moment a black woman in a black dress opened the large metal doors at the back of the hall, exchanging a brief communicative look with the man in the vest. He turned to smile at Stuart, his face showing not a hint of blush, and soon the engagement ensued. Stuart found himself awkwardly sitting in the second chair, still warm from the hour's delay. "Must be busy this time of year, eh, Stuart?" asked the man, who had yet to retake the seat, the presumptive member of the Bay Area Betterment and Health Society, again confirmed, and turned to select one of the pamphlets piled upon an end table of minuscule height. He handed one to Stuart. It was a single folded page on thick glossy paper, showing a picture of Golden Gate Park and what seemed to be the large group photograph of a club gathering. Stuart thanked him for the informative material, though he had already been well versed regarding the scientific organization, from its 400-year history to speculation upon its upcoming plans and charity work. "Oh, that sounds swell," he mimicked eagerly, affecting himself to be naively unaware rather than firmly convinced of his own indubitable qualifications. He had heard online, and more helpfully from a friend he knew on a forum, the club only spoke in official terms behind closed doors to facilitate for its members more liberated discussion. Great intellectuals had been initiated, and great intellectuals had been made. It said so in the pamphlet. Laughter came from the closed door, and Stuart tried not to think how it would be very nice if Sarah, the girl before him, would also be admitted, so he could get to know her more, as if getting accepted would need more benefits to persuade to pique. This was the place to be, said all what one must do in order to become a full-fledged leader of progressive society, and Stuart had always wanted to be a vampire. He scanned over the paper, and even the alluring language came off to him as exclusive. Stuart could not hold back his smile any longer, and the other man noticed. "I've actually read your file, my good man," he said, stroking his thick hairy chin. Stuart awaited the completed placation, and once they had met eyes, the club member continued by whispering, ending his head closer to him, "I think we would be fools not to let you in. is here." Artie kicked and his fist clenched in excitement. Stuart's smile grew, showing brightened teeth, and he could only mutter, "Thank you. I am a big admirer of what you do here. Is that so?" asked the man, finding a kindred spirit. "Yes," Stuart answered. "I think this is exactly where I want to take my skills. I'm looking forward to seeing how I can help and contribute to the club." As furthering success, the older man nodded, smiling also. "We'll see what we can do with you." Thoughts of the future flowed through Stuart's field of vision. Unable to be Conti, Ned, the high-class society, a company of gentlemen, and the finest edge of female colleagues, using advanced techniques to extract untarnished hemoglobin and innumerable additional nutrients which had been enabling their superior race to thrive without the brutal need for harvesting, enslaving, or killing anyone or anything, not even pigs. Stuart knew all this, and he knew he belonged here, in this associatio, and of immortals moving the world forward, especially if people like Sarah would be among them, and he withheld the rushing desire to envision her transformed, unleashed beyond the standards of commonplace beauty. It would be truly empowering to finally live and work as he wanted, and here was the goal, at last. The door opened, and the secretary kindly said his name. "Mr. Unitas, they'll see you now." His heart quickened, perhaps for the last time as a feeble primate, and the man in the vest wished him good luck while Stuart walked to the door, buttoning the 2T button of his coat. "We're sorry to make you wait," she noted effectively. The secretary, upon closer vicinity, was also an ostensible initiate. The women showed signs almost instantaneously and more dramatically than the men. According to his research, Stuart worried his new appearance would be overshadowed by those of fellow neonates. It could take decades before the distinction of his vampire icy training could be portrayed by looks alone, but he marched on nonetheless. "Right this way," she said, smirking, and Stuart followed her to a set of double doors, which he hardly saw open before he realized he was inside the room. Against the opposite wall sat four elders in shining judicial robes behind a normal white plastic table. Stuart made sure to catch each of their gaze, as once the doors had been closed behind him, but there was a fifth individual standing next to the door, and a sixth. Stuart's pulse fluttered once he recognized the golden grain hair, and how bolstering the pale mystique of her form and face. Alike the green eyes sank into him as if they were aimed and fired. The other member stood well higher than the average man, meaning he must have been a guard or security worker of some kind. But Stuart didn't know why Sarah remained in the room when her interview had hardly preceded his welcome. "Mr. Unitas," said one of the elders, one of three balding men with stonework cheeks and cropped hair of glistening pearly silver. He smiled magnanimously, but Stuart felt his voice carried with it no trace of impression. "We're sorry," the speaker continued, "but we are afraid we cannot offer you a position with our organization at this time." When Stuart had just begun reeling, he noticed the guard and Sarah both approaching from behind, from opposite sides, and before he could make his case, the larger man's grip had smothered his mouth, quelling all protest, and the youngest member of the Bay Area Betterment and Health Society revealed freshly protruded canine teeth before jabbing them into Stuart's neck, playfully pausing while their eyes were partially locked decisive jowls vicing quivering flares. She pulled back sharply, and his liveliness gushed away for her to drink, to serve as an irrefutable pledge of loyalty. As she sucked from the struggling neck, the others in the room cheered and clapped, remembering the blissful intensity of their own first kills. The lone matron at the panel reached for the appropriate ink stamp and markedly punched it upon the girl's papers, printing sternly in bold crimson letters, "Admission granted. Story 2. Don't ever let them in. I am terrified of the dark." My grandmother, on the other hand, had an affinity for the dark. She loved and enjoyed the dark so much that most windows in her house were wall shut, and the few that remained were, except for rare occasions like family visits, blacked out with several layers of black curtain. And as it was only when I was about 16 that I realized that those two, her love and my fear of the dark, were connected. When I was small, I was, supposedly, very hyperactive. My mother never managed to control me, and my father only did so on those rare occasions when he threatened me with punishments. But I loved my grandparents, and, as my parents said, I always behaved right when my grandmother was around. Accordingly, my parents dropped me many times at my grandmother's place so that they themselves could have a calm weekend. I was 8 years old when she died. At that time, I was already scared of the dark, except, of course, when my grandparents were around. Those 8 years I stayed many times over. I remember vividly how I played with my grandfather and Uncle Owen in the darkness. We had our special games, like a noise-based version of hide and seek, which only worked when the house was particularly quiet, and my grandfather taught me how to carve and T.O. spoons and flutes with just my sense of touch. I remember it exactly, the way their faces were lightly visible in the dark, with their eyes always penetrated through the thickest curtains of darkness. They were bright white, as if they were glowing from the sendeyes, with just a black pupil at the center. My grandmother was always working around the house, cooking and baking for me, cleaning or tidying or preparing the beds for the night. The room always felt warmer when she was there, and so usually I asked my grandfather and Uncle Owen to play with me in the room that she was in. Those weekends I never missed the light. Even my dreams were often just noises and smells and textures and shapes, never colors or visible objects. Still today I can navigate perfectly in the dark, and still today I can see very well in the dark. And around my 16th year of life I concluded that my strong vision at night was the cause for my paralyzing fear of the dark. The fear. I had been there as long as I remember, and on most nights I slept with a night light. On those weekends with my grandmother, the darkness had never been a problem. Cuddled up to her warm body, I never felt half here, and I never minded the figures that seemed to stand in the room all around my bed. They only came with the darkness, never when there was a slight flicker of light, just with the absolute blackness of a night in a room without windows. My grandmother called them the outcasts. She said that they were family and friends, former close ones, that wanted to return from the other side. She taught me again and again that I should never let them return. I remember the way she said it. We were lying in the bed, my head cuddled up to the warmth of her shoulder. Somewhere behind me my grandfather was snoring, and when I turned I could see his face glowing in the darkness. With his white skin, it was even more visible than that of my grandmother. "You can see the difference in their faces," she said. "Their faces are darker, but if you really want to make sure, then you have to look at their eyes. If their eyes are as black as their face or even darker than they on the wrong side, they are dead, and they should stay that way no matter how much you miss them. So they can't come unless you allow them to come. What if I let them in? Don't ever let them in. Black on black." But I still saw them as clear as a pencil line pressed hard on a piece of paper, the type of pencil line that doesn't just color the paper but rather pushes itself into the paper. That night my grandmother fell asleep quickly, but I, in the safety of her arms, and with my grandfather behind me, watched the figures. They were gesturing and hovering, voiced words, and sometimes fought against one another. They pushed each other to the side and backwards, fighting for a spot on the borderline to life. I saw their figures and I recognized their sizes and hairstyles. Often I even thought I knew which clothes they were wearing. I never asked my grandmother about that, but for myself I concluded those were the ways they looked in the moment that they stepped from life to death. With my grandmother I was safe, but without her the nights were terror. They came closer, and they seemed more energetic, more violent, more likely to break through that barrier. Maybe they were closer because I was closer to letting them in, half out of fear and half out of curiosity. The night light was my savior, but in those nights when my parents forgot to plug the light and there was no salvation, they stood above me with their dark figures pressed into the darkness, and those eyes so dark that they seemed to extend deeper into space, as if they were hollow. With 16 I tried to cure myself off my fear by shock therapy. I threw myself into one dark night after the other, but rather than improve the situation got worse. There was one figure particularly pushy, a smaller one with wild curly hair and the darkest eyes of them all. I always knew who she was. She had only been there since I was 8. The conclusions of my 16th year made too much sense to be overturned. I gave up my defense, and accepted my fear and eternal dependence on nightlights. When I moved to university, I even chose an apartment with a street lamp outside so that the light would certainly come through my window and keep the figures at bay. With 23, I learned the truth about my fear. I was at my mother's place. We were at our second bottle of wine and the soothing melancholy, the type that you can see in a French actress's eyes, had enriched the air. Somehow we came to speak about my grandmother. "I miss her," my mother said. "Me too," I said. "Sometimes I still dream of her cookies, and when I wake up I can nearly taste the vanilla." "Oh," she said, "your grandfather loved those, did he? I don't remember him eating any." My mother laughed. "You were probably too young to remember that." "Not really. I remember playing with him." "Oh, you do, yeah. I play with him all the time." "Really, you remember that?" "Of course. Why," she said, "I'm really happy for that." "Me too. I always thought you wouldn't remember him because you were so young." I took a sip from my glass and let the bitterness fade from my mouth. "I don't remember going to his funeral." "Of course not," she said. "We left you with a friend and went hollow." "And what? Why?" "We thought you wouldn't understand it. You were just when your grandfather and Uncle Owen had their accident. When I was 16, I thought I was scared of the figures standing at the borderline to our world. Since I'm 23, I know that I'm not actually scared of. Those figures at the border lined, I'm scared and wondering how many others were allowed back inside. Story 3, Slender Twilight, the naughty version. What the fuck did I just read? Pretty much everyone. Fanboy97. Journal Entry 1. Oh, how no one understands the dark brooding angst stirring in my lungs. I couldn't concentrate in school again today. Thoughts of him distracted me from my composition writing class. How could I possibly worrying about the fundamentals of English grammar stuff stupid when there's a tall, sexy devil stalking the spooky nights? I wish he would stalk me. I know some people would say that I am a silly pants, that he would devour my soul or drive me to madness, but they don't understand him like do. I know he would not do this to me, and how could he? I'm his biggest fan. Oh well, I suppose I'll just have to prove them all wrong. Fanboy97. Journal Entry 2. Woe is me. Must I be alone for all eternity, doomed to wander the cruel world in my misunderstoodedness? I spent the entire afternoon in the cemetery after school today, drawing the sacred symbol on each and every tombstone, the circle of darkness, with the X of also darkness, awaiting for him to run into my arms. I even wore my outfit, my extra special Sailor Moon miniskirt and thigh-high socks. I must have ridden my tricycle around those gravestones 1,000 times before I ran out of high C. How could he not be enticed by me? Am I not enticing? Of course I am. It saint have been those fart faces who showed up and interrupted my unholy ritual that called me names, really mean names that cut into my soul like razors. I tried not to cry, but I could not stop myself. If you don't stop, shouldn't make fun of the black forces that dwell within me. I yelled at them before they started throwing bananas at me. Bananas that cut deeper than any black razor or black BL. Agnes, I rode my tricycle home as fast as I could. On the way I checked my vampire Pikachu watch. It was almost 6 o'clock. My mom must have been worried sick, but then I got home, and she gave me some spaghetti. Yummy. Fanboy97. Journal Entry 3. I just took a bubble bath, and now I need to check my emails for the rightful acceptance of my creepypasta submission. Let's look. Nothing. Anger and other dirty talk. How could it not be posted? Yet I submitted it yesterday afternoon. How long do I have to wait for the world to see my spectacular greatness? I know that jerky jerk-F, ASA administrator, is jealous of my uncanny ability to write epic tales of melancholy spookiness. Of course that's what it is. Nobody could pass up my masterpiece unless they were intimidated. It was Kaye D. The Grand Adventures of the Totally Badass and in no way at all homoerotic sparkly vampires. It was so awesome. I guess I'm just going to have to send that jerk a bunch of emails outlining why he's such a jerk. Then he'll see, they'll all see. But it's almost 8, and I need to snuggle into bed next to my Jeff the Killer body pillow and let my darky dark mind of darkness take me to the ultra darkness of dreamland. Fanboy97. Journal Entry 4. I woke up from that dream again. I just had to write it down this time. It was the one where I'm lying there still, in my bed, completely naked when the wind blows my bedroom window open, and then that beautiful slender body of his floats and, hovering above me, tempting me with the prospects of sweet sweaty passion, calm. He to me Sweet prince, I say to him as he lowers himself gracefully, his black suit stretched tight across his lovely form. Do you know how long I've been waiting for you? I ask him. He never says a word. Oh, the strong and silent type, aren't you? I whisper into where his ear balls should be. That's okay. I continue in the most seductive voice I can manage. You don't have to say a thing. I pulled on his necktie, pulling his faceless face against mine. Then we start making out, and it was sexy. Then after like an hour, I whisper back into his ear balls, how about you take off that suit and show me what those tentacles can really do? When I woke up, my sheets were all sticky. Fanboy 97. Journal entry 5. Oh my God. 333,333. I don't even know to explain it. But after that hot, sticky dream, I just couldn't go back to sleep. So I kinda just stayed awake and sent 50 complaints to that jerk-faced administrator. When I got this sense, a most arousing sense at that, I got this feeling that I needed to look out of my window, and when I did, it was him. Slenderman was watching me from across the street. I knew it was him at all. Hence, he's impossible to mistake the tall, thin body in the most fabulous of suits. He was just standing there motionless, expressionless, beckoning to me. Oh shits, I better get back to the window. He's still out there, and I need to press my bare nipples against the glass to keep him interested. I'll come back later to write how it went. Oh God, I feel as giddy as a schoolgirl at the gynecologist. Tease the next day. Officer Stinson is standing at the scene of the crime. His partner, Officer Drake, approaches him with a cup of coffee in each hand. So what in the hell and the hootenanny happened? D here, asks Drake as he glances over the carnage. Up high in a tree sectioned off by yellow hazard tape is the body of a young boy, his torso impaled on one of the many jagged branches. On the ground below him there are several plastic bags filled with what is assumed to be some of the boy's organs. They include eyes, kidneys, liver, pancreas, gallbladder, and several fingers. Officer Stinson hands his partner a piece of paper covered in blood. We found this nailed to the tree, says Stinson to Drake. I think you know what it means. Drake reads the note, each letter spelled out in crimson. No means no. Drake reads aloud. Great googly moogly. Not another one of these sickos. Must be the third one this year. And it does explain why the kid up there is wearing a dress. Officer Stinson looks back up into the tree. The boy is in fact still wearing his Sailor Moon outfit. Yeah, says Stinson. We're dealing with one twisted pervert here. All right, we checked this kid's journal earlier this morning. It looked like he was getting ready to try and date rape Slenderman. Drake shakes his head in disgust. Sweet zombie Jesus, kids these days messing around on the interwebs, thinking that it couldn't happen to them. Then all of a sudden old Slendy gets sick and tired of being sexually harassed. Can anyone really blame him for resorting to this? Stinson looks down at his feet with a somber look on his face. No, I don't think anyone really can. But we gotta look at it this way. At least for now we can take comfort in knowing that this nightmare is finally over. Just then, the boy in the tree coughs out a spattering of blood. Why don't you love me? He chokes out without hesitation. Officers Drake and Stinson pull their side arms from their holsters, emptying the clips into the whining fanboy. When the dust settles, Stinson looks back to Drake. Okay, now it's over. Story 4. Crossroads, during nightly hours of yore, and a time of horror and war, I would sit on a dank oak bench with my eyes shut, calm and closure. Then my eyes open, and I sense a figure approach me with grace. One of nature's eccentric frights perched itself above my shoulder. It croaked into my ear, with its feathers amusing my bare shoulder, sharing glee with its mother. Ah, how the wiry can descend to tea, ye depths of despairing sin, this absolute essence and seduction to persuade another, learned by my petite one's watching of a man's unrelenting haunting. Frightened by the chary taunting of Th. E1, he still remembers that demoralizing moment, that rest upon his right shoulder, widowing since December. He rose from his feeble sorrow, evident now through tomorrow. He pressed his face on the image of her beauty, taken back by her. Her southern voice still soothes his ears, though he has not heard her in years. She gleamed from her portrait, and tears ran down it as he ponders. I could see inside his soul of what he could no longer hinder. To end his throbbing bare, I continued to watch him drown. Still showing was his dreaded frown, cleansing himself over a bottle of whiskey. Tears still timber clearly. His love is still showing, not ceasing, forever growing, from which I then started loathing. Famished for what he considers, I stroked my friend's head and smiled, for what it did earlier. It taunted the widower. An hour passed, then he left home with his bottle in hand to roam. He staggered to a grimy crossroad, standing at its center on his knees. He waited to see someone able to set him free. Hands folded, he began to plea somehow a release over her. Suddenly a foul smell lingered in the air. It reeked of ember. It was then that I entered. Behind him I stood with no sound, my feathered black dress touching ground. He turned with some fright at my appearance, but then he stood eager, hellhounds at my left and right, blood slavering from their mouths, eyes white, snarling from the unshorn man's sight, with burns and scars replacing fur. I smiled, alerting them to heel, and then spoke to the stranger. "How can I help you, kind sir?" He glared both wonder and remorse at seeing my mystical source. His legs trembled, sweat soaked his palms, and his breath was sorely bitter. I smiled while he grew silent, waiting to hear why I was sent. Then, with a grimace and knees bent, he descended again to surrender. "Please," he pleaded in misery, "bring me my wife, my soul over, out of eternal slumber." Droll it was to see how the will to avail could entice the frail. This thing was gripping his fingertips into the gravel mire. Of the beings that he could see, he bestows his mislaid soul. To me, an angel whose wings ceased to be, stripped during the quarrel's ladder. However, in this loathing outcome, which would one's sorrow prefer, move on or know no longer, I paced about the feeble man, witnessing his fate in my hands. Our eyes followed like two warriors ready to strike each other. Bound we were to this circumstance of one's happiness based on chance, his sue, held taken just for the glance, the touch, the smell, the love of her. "I can fulfill that task," I said. "Once more you will be together, you will claim what you remember." He gave a soulful expression. Possibly from my compassion, I usually show no apathy when dealing with a martyr. Some desire the act of lust, others pride for statures above, power, with everyone else shoved, thinking they are superior. This man, though simply desired his one significant other, his one love to transpire. He gave a subtle, grieving look, knowing of the wrong path he took. People consent to an offer and receive not what they prefer. He glanced at the hounds by my sides, staring. Flames were in their pearl eyes. Thinking what I said was a lie, he asked for some honest answers. She will be healthy, yes, he asked. No sickness and death hereafter, as before her departure. She will be sane, I said calmly. Say yes, and she will come shortly. A tear ran down his right eye, then the left. My patience was a blur. You justly mourn your wife, Lenore. His eyes at the hounds nevermore shot at mine stronger than before. Love is not without loss, good sir, his fro, and became a grim expression, and then I heard him mutter, I know you. I remember his mumbling tone intrigued me with a sense of astonished glee. To think that he would ever view, though my attire of feathers, my elegant, roguish presence, or my foul, demonic essence, standing by him without sensing this was not our first time together. His eyes widened and his thoughts heightened. He could clearly remember I was he black tempter, you were the raven at my door, that always quoted nevermore, he said with his tone shrieking every word so that I would hinder, splintering my cold-hearted Dian. Amber so I would be cringing, my tainted flesh ghastly bleeding, from fear of one man's sole valor, however, his endeavor to seem clever through his one gesture will cause his own disaster. My wonder, and I see all. I told him, soon you will fall. Enough, he grouched. Do as I told your servant with its black feathers. I thought you hated loneliness. I stroked his face and gave a kiss. He quickly gripped my arm and hissed, you foul beast and burdened sinner. Why do you indulge me with pleasures you cannot truly conquer? My wife, deceased, no longer, Under roared as I saw his right arm raise a knife of iron form. We are legion, for we are many. Turn away now or suffer. I laid on the mucky soil and watched him gradually fall. All the month, that he told, yet he could not commit murder, the temptation of my raven that left his mind to surrender simply exposed his hunger. For months after our encounter, I researched volumes of scripture, locating any lapsed lore and legends on demons and tempters. I stared as he stood there saying, I vow many hours hunting, torturing demons, questioning, curious on how you labor. He threw his blade down at the soul, knelling towards me, and whispered, no more nightmares forever. He brought out his hand and helped me stand on my feet, sobbing at me, I have spent my Rima, hiding life, marveling how you things venture. You, the raven, there is no end, however, vengeance is the same through all eyes, and I do not tolerate lies. This stranger may have sympathy for my presence and my divine power, but my doubts justify my mind, for this man's mood became too kind. Deducing further, I could find that he did not simply torture. Confession is good for the soul no matter. The sin or sinner I gladly made an endeavor. As he surveyed with his head turning, I stood from behind, staring. Surroundings altered to soothe my fondness, soaked with blood and fire. I made sure that he would witness proper torture with no dismiss in the underworld of abyss, knowing only my image of her. His corpse laid sprawled at the crossroad with a bottle by his shoulder. Nightmare never disappears. Story 5, the last. There will be a day, I promise you, when fantasy will become reality, when great creatures with thousands of towering legs, graze gracefully on the tops of he tallest trees, when the oceans of the earth are teeming with translucent, tentacled beasts, so tangled and entwined with one another that they live as one being. The blackest depths of the deepest cave will writhe as gargantuan plants send their roots to explore, delving into the underbelly of the crust. All of this, and so much more will come to pass, and it will pass without humanity, it is true. Mankind will never cease to exist. Unlike most species, humanity possesses a will to live so strong that it surpasses consciousness, choice, and fate itself. Humanity is doomed to last forever, but at some point among the millennia and the strife and the peace, it will all come down to one being, one man, who doesn't have a choice whether or not he wants to exist, because he is the very last human being alone in his world, far, far from earth and any other tie to sanity as you and I know it. He will inhabit this world for as long as he has to. Most likely, he is already there. Every time he awakens, he stares into a dark sky where no sun will ever rise. He leaves a small hole in the roof of his hut, just in case, but the sun will never come. He opens the small wooden door and ventures once again into the black world that is his hell. He walks, eyes half-lidded, uninterested, seeing, cautious, but uncaring, soulless, hopeless. He dodges through trees, over hills, across rivers, all shrouded in an inky darkness. Finally, he comes to a body lying face down in the mool. Arrows protrude gruesomely, stuck into its back, legs, neck, but it had not died right away. The being had crawled desperately for a long while before bleeding out and coming to a final halt. The man surveys the scene, the look of sadness on his face, so profound that the trees around him seem to bow in sympathy. He rolls the poor wretch over and examines its final pained expression. He knows the thoughts that led to this ghastly semblance. He knows the pain, the agony that was felt before a fading blackness. He knows that face, it is his own, for this is his cursed immortality. He can die, how he can die, and how he has, but he will always awake again in his bed and his hut, in this accursed black world. The body had already begun to shrivel, and as he watches, its decomposition quickens until nothing is left of the body but the clothes it had been wearing and the pack on its back. The clothes were now worthless, blotted and torn, so he only casts the pack as he stands. The forest suddenly abandons its mourning silence, now filling the air with the terrible sound of bone on bone and the growling moan of the devourers. He draws a crude sword afar on the pack, but only as a precaution. He turns and begins the swift trek back to the hut. For this is another curse bestowed upon the unfortunate being. He is not alone. Things stalk in the dark around him, creeping, skittering, lumbering. They are monsters, for lack of a better word, monsters of the night. They are savage, hungry killers, punishing any mistake on his part with often painful death, but he holds no ill will towards them. He treats them as respected enemies, knowing that they follow only their own nature and a search for food and survival. Just the same as himself, he has been with them for so long and killed so many that they have become brothers of the night. But the others, they are the ones that make this a true hell. they are yet simply creatures controlled by instinct. They manipulate, lie, and punish, all vying against one another for control over him. They call themselves gods. Their whispers and screams torment his every moment. Their demands nonsensical and often fatal, driving him off the brink of sanity over and over again. Even as he lies in his bed, staring up at his shoddy ceiling, he hears them. "Prove yourself to me," they whisper. "Sacrifice to me," each one with a different ritual to perform, a different foe to kill, a different altar to deface. His walls, covered in etchings and scratchings, mirroring the torment from within, the horror. As I realize that they won't ever go away, ever, hope taunts me in many forms. The moon calls them, it will never end, surrounded de sensiti. Said by death they made me what I am. I give up, he lost hope centuries ago, but that doesn't matter. For 100 years he lay uneating, drinking, moving. He died countless times, simply laying on his old body until it shriveled away. Finally, he realized that it was no good. He would have to push on, but towards what? All that exists here is survival. What was his goal? How could he end this eternity? So he gave himself into the gods, wholeheartedly striving for them, killing, dying, and building in their name. He treks through his endless world, eyes half open, searching for what hour at he knows not. So it is, and so it will be, until he realizes his true goal. So what, you ask, is his goal? How can there be any hope for humanity if there is only one? The world he is abandoned on is ancient beyond belief. Even the tiniest remnants of dust, the smallest microbes of life that have ever existed on that world are powerful enough to call themselves gods, and they do, but they are nothing compared to the beings that live on this world originally. The masters of the universe, they created and destroy and flourished on such a level that the stars themselves couldn't comprehend its magnitude. They were the creators. They held every piece of knowledge available from every time and space imaginable, and then they slept, and still they sleep on this world, where a single sentient body roams, trying to find the creators. Even though he doesn't know it, he will end their slumber, and in a vast awakening that can only be described as an explosion of transcosmic size, they will recognize him and all that he has done. They will recognize his body from an archaic design, one that came from a time even before themselves, and they will give him a blueprint and tell him that he has one more trial before he can truly die. He must continue the legacy, create the next humans he must make it so that he is not the last, and he will. He will make them, name them, and then, finally, with the beginnings of a smile on his face, he will die. So when they awake, and awake they shall, I promise you, humanity will continue. They will proceed, as they always do, to master their world, and then the next, and the next. But until then, it will come to pass, as I said, great winged things with no eyes will hunt other winged things, spiraling through gaseous worlds and dances of hunger. Diamond planets will converse with one another through pings and gongs of their magnetic cores. Gigantic space-faring organisms will open their cavernous maws, sending their roars across galaxies to greet their brethren. All of this will come to pass. Meanwhile, a single man will be struggling on a single world, dying again and again until his species is returned to the universe once more. Story 6. The bitter cold gusts ripped through the thermal underwear he wore underneath his camouflage, biting into his very bones. He had climbed into his tree stand about 30 feet up a yellow-leaved cottonwood and had huddled with his knees to his chest to fight the freeze as he scanned the open field in the midst of the woods. The hunter admired the beauty of the frost-tipped grass that reflected the full moon setting in the early morning. He thought he loved this time of year, but rumors of unexplainable occurrences and a thick fog seen in the distance inching its way closer advised him that he would not be out there long. As the glowing moon tilted under the horizon opposite of the arriving fog, the hunter decided to peruse the scenery one last time before quitting the hunt or risk getting lost in the fog. In the final sweep, his pulse quickened. He noticed an odd silhouette against the fog, about 200 yards away to his front left. The twilight made his unaided sight untrustworthy, so he decided to put his binoculars to his stubble head face. The magnified black figure had many details in shadowed darkness, but he could see the outline of the beast. The hoofed feet connected to what seemed to be abnormally long legs. The elongated fingers wisped in the breeze, but came to a pointy end. Its stretched arms were connected to a thin torso, but the muscles bulged from its shoulders. As the hunter scanned up the profile, he distinguished the ears and the way they came to a point half a foot above its head. The only colors the creature reflected were white teeth that had as many edges as a bandsaw blade, producing a menacing smile, and thinned, blood-red slits where pupilled eyes normally were. Just as the hunter gathered all of this information in the span of about 10 seconds, the thing disappeared into the overcoming fog. He slowly lowered his binoculars. The town wouldn't believe that he had actually seen what was causing the unexplainable occurrences. He now knew how disfigured, gory stray animals dotted the main street after a full moon night. He now knew how a whole herd of cattle had been mutilated, their flesh strewn across a bloody field, their bones shattered into millions of pieces like broken glass. He now knew how a group of young grade schoolers, taking a field trip to a quaint pumpkin patch, had been mauled by what seemed to be a bear in a bearless part of the country. The bus offering no protection, as it ended up like a crushed pop can. Even though he knew the sun was peeking over the horizon, it only created an eerie glow through the fog. He decided to get on from the cottonwood, but as he looked down from his tree stand, he noticed the fog had crept to where he couldn't see the ground. He thought he might stay as quiet as a graveyard and high as tree stand, but the crashing of a fallen tree somewhere in the fog and the stench of death permeating his surroundings made him think differently. The deafening break of the silence came opposite of the place his vehicle was parked, so he quickly climbed down the tree, leaving everything but his gun. As soon as he hit the ground, a sharp pain shot from one shoulder to the other, causing him to lose his balance. He turned around as he fell and pulled the trigger at whatever was behind him, but the gun was still on its safety. It wouldn't have mattered if the rifle had fired because the pain producer disappeared into the mist. He picked himself off of the ground and noticed a stark red streak melting the frost on the ground. He made his mind up as he turned his safety off that he wouldn't be the next and explain the occurrence, and hurried in the direction of his truck, the sweat on his brow only amplifying the cold. As the leaves crunched under his boots, He could hear branches cracking far, all directions in the mystifying fog. One loud snap came only feet away from him, and he stopped to aim his gun into the haze. The hush that surrounded him as he aimed stopped his warm blood from flowing through his body, making him ice cold with the calm. Over the next few achingly long seconds, he became somewhat hopeful. But just as he lowered the gun, something soundlessly came from his right and knocked him clean off of his feet, the rifle flying into the unknown mist. A sting went from his knee to his brain, making him scream in pain, but also making him become even more desperate. With a limp, he began in the direction he thought his truck was, the fog seemingly clearing as the sun warmed the day. He couldn't hear anything besides his own heavy breathing, taking in the putrefying smell. He was only a short few hundred feet from his truck when the black beast towered over him in his path. A demonic hand swept across his face, knocking him to tea. He ground, his terrified cries magnified each time the sound of crushing bones echoed off the trees. The monster cut through the hunter's skin and severed the veins as easily as a freshly sharpened bandsaw blade cutting through butchered meat. With one last violent crack, the sounds disappeared with the fog. Now you may be wondering how I know every detail of this occurrence. The last surviving human did die, didn't he? You see, I was watching the whole thing. I looked down from my solitary perch as my monster, yes, my monster, crunched and swallowed the last bone as his back bristled. The reason why I am telling you this is because the creature looked at me one last time with his diabolic red eyes, looked deep into his creator's soul, licked the last drop of blood from its lips, slowly turned into the thick forest, and was never seen again. I should have known what would happen when I put the hooves of a dead goat, the wings of a dead bat, the teeth of a dead crocodile, the muscle fibers of a dead, crazed gorilla, and drops of my very own blood in the fire. My basement instantly smelled of the most decaying death you can imagine. The beast had leapt from that fire, had a meanness about it, but it obeyed my every command. It grew more evil with each act, starting with killing the dog that kept me up at night to eliminating my neighbor's cattle herd. Then it started to do things I didn't tell it to do. I woke a fortnight ago to him getting out of his cage and followed him to that field of death, only watching because I knew my efforts could not save the hunter. Now, though I don't know where it is, I feel like it will always be hunting, waiting for the opportune moment to kill again. It may be the thing that makes you wonder what's in the cellar in your backyard or in the basement of your house. It may be the brief disturbance when you think something is peering around the corner, waiting to pounce when you least expect it. It may be the thing you think you see in the mirror when you look at your reflection and notice something stir behind you. It may cause the brief, cold, tingling sensation along your spine that you are feeling at this very moment. But I have to quit writing, because it may be the thing that is breathing its warm, putrid breath on my neck right now. Story 7. An uninvited guest. As Samuel edged closer and closer to the staircase, the scratching grew louder and louder until it became a continuous clawing. This was not the first time this has occurred since he had moved here almost 5 weeks ago. But it was never like this. It seemed louder and lasted for much longer. 3 weeks after he moved into the house, Samuel had begun to notice that many things around the house were strange and uncommon. He also noticed that every piece of furniture that was left in the house by the previous owner was disproportionate and out of place. It was a small difference, barely noticeable, but once he did, everything just seemed wrong. All the chairs being too short, the kitchen table being too tall, the bed was abnormally narrow, and the ceilings seemed far too high. But this was not the worst part about the house. 1 week after he finished moving into the house, he was rearranging the basement, and he found a small door in the corner at the bottom of the St. Ayres. The door was just a little over 4 feet in height and less than 2 feet wide. After countless of hours of trying to figure out what lay behind the door, what it meant, why it was there, Samuel could only stare and wonder as none of his questions were answered. The thing he found particularly strange about the door was that no matter how hard he tried, he was not able to turn the knob. Samuel now stood before the disproportionate staircase. He took the first step into the darkness, and the old wooden boards creaked under his weight, and the sound stopped. The entire house, he was engulfed into an eerie silence, and for the first time this night Samuel realized the danger that could be waiting at the bottom of those steps. He flicked on the fluorescent lights that had been installed into the basement before he had moved in. The dim and unreliable light given off by the fluorescent bulbs created shadows on the far wall and made the entire situation feel even more worrying. He cautiously walked over to the small door adjacent from the stairs. He knelt down and tried the doorknob. It was no use. At this point, Samuel was running out of ideas about what could have been causing the sound and decided to return to bed. He ascended the staircase, stumbling on the last disproportionate step, and walked back to his room. It was no more than an hour later when he was ripped from the warm embrace of sleep for the second time, but it was not the same noise as before. This time it sounded more as if someone was rattling the knob of his front door. He jumped head out of bed and ran down his hallway leading to his front door. As he reached it, he grabbed the doorknob only to find that it was firmly in place and still locked. No one was at the door, but yet the rattling continued. Samuel turned his attention to the staircase once more and half-sprinted to the bottom. A wave of hate, anger, and utter disbelief washed over him as he saw that the knob to the tiny door was shaking violently. Without thinking, he grabbed a hammer that sat on the shelf to his left hand and began to pound on the door. The rattling had stopped long before now, but he did not care. All he thought about was getting to the other side of the door. He broke the wooden boards, and after he had managed to make a decent-sized hole in the door, he stopped. He took a moment to catch his breath, and through the hole in the door all he saw was darkness on the other side, and the knob began to rattle once more. Samuel stared blankly as the doorknob continued to rattle, and at this point he knew something was wrong. Something very bad was about to happen if he stayed in his home any longer. The doorknob stopped, and Samuel was about to turn and run back up the staircase. He would leave the house for the night, rent a hotel room, and maybe return in the morning to collect his things. Then he would move. There was a slight click. Samuel turned back to tea. He tore to see the knob begin to turn, and the door slowly creaked open, and at first all he saw was darkness from inside of the small opening. And then, to his horror and dismay, he saw 2 long, spindly arms emerge from the darkness, grasping the door frame on both sides as they pulled, and something impossible large to have been confined into the small room which lay beyond. The door slowly began to drag itself through the opening. First came a head, and then a torso and a pair of legs crawled into the basement. Whatever this creature was that now towered over Samuel, it was not Happy Abo. At its current predicament, its head thudded against the 10-foot-high basement ceiling, forcing it to hunch over. The creature had dark, pure black skin and gleaming golden eyes which Samuel found it almost impossible to tear his gaze away from. It had white hair that covered the beast from waist down and from the elbows down to its wrist. The creature had long, bony limbs and fingers that ended in razor-sharp claws that gleamed like polished black steel. Samuel could see every bone in its body, and it looked like it had been nearly starved to death. It had the body of the man, but the head of a large dog or wolf. Its mouth was set into a ferocious snarl of jagged teeth coated in a thick layer of plaque and blood. The creature let out a deep guttural snarl, and with one hand he grabbed for Samuel but missed, sending him sprawling on to the cold cement floor. He climbed to his feet and launched himself up the staircase, but the beast followed in pursuit. Samuel managed to make it to the top, but then became aware of an intense pressure on his ankle as he was yanked back down the staircase. Hitting his chin several times on the hardwood steps, the beast was now holding him upside down by the ankles. Samuel kicked his feet, trying to free himself from the strong grip of the creature, but he soon found that all of his efforts would be futile. Samuel opened his mouth in a last-ditch effort to scream, but stopped as he watched the tip of his tongue fall to the floor. Along with a mouth full of blood, it reached its other hand and seized him by the throat, holding him closer to its face. He could smell its putrid breath as he stared into its golden eyes. This would be the last thing Samuel would see in his short life. Its hand tense as it began to squeeze the life out of him. Samuel's eyes widened as his life came to an end. He let out one last blotted breath as his eyes were forced to stare into the golden abyss. His grip tightened around the creature's wrist until his thumb touched his fingers. Blood streamed from his open mouth and down his chin as he tried desperately and hopelessly to suck any air into his lung. Darkness creeped around the edges of his vision until it seemed to smother him from every possible angle. Samuel thrashed once more and lost all feeling, and he fell out of the world he had known. When all his life the creature's malicious smile spread from ear to ear as savored the last weakened struggle of its prey.